What is up, my bodyweight warriors, and welcome back to another Movement 101 video. Today I want to address a very important topic, which I would consider a foundation before we move any further on with movement training, and that is mobility. If you're not new to the channel and you've been around for a while, you probably know that mobility, flexibility is kind of important to me, and I think it should be important to you as well. But really, when we look at movement training, and especially those flows that you see Ido Portal and his crew doing, they're going through some very impressive ranges of motion, having control throughout, as well as linking it into these powerful moves. And really, having a good range of motion is going to be a base starting point for a lot of further development. And this applies outside of movement training. You think if you want to do something like a handstand, you're going to have good overhead mobility to even start having a chance of being able to do a good handstand. So mobility is really that foundation that you build upon. So you can develop this in the normal ways using standard, very focused exercises and stretches, many of which I share on this channel as routines, and I'll link to a playlist down below. What I want to introduce to you today is something that I often do, and that is develop mobility through movement. Phrase use it or lose it comes to mind with mobility. We often want to develop a range of motion, but you need to question, why do you want to develop that range of motion, and are you going to use it? Because if you're not going to use it, then it's actually going to be a lot harder to maintain. So if we can say we want to develop our hamstring flexibility, and we can take that and put that into an exercise or a movement pattern that's going to help do that, then we might have a lot more success in developing it. One great example that I recommend everyone should try is Ido Portal's locomotion routine on YouTube, and I'll link to it down below. And that he goes through 5 or 6 very basic exercises, all of which are going to help strengthen those end ranges of motion. For example, the duck walk is fantastic for ankle dorsiflexion. The ostrich walk, actually something I use quite a lot with clients, is great for hamstring stretching. It's essentially a ballistic stretch done in a moving way. So I'm going to give you now a few examples of how you can develop those base ranges of motion with movement exercises, and it's something you can just throw in at the end of your training session. Say you're just training and usually you might finish up with a little bit of stretching and mobility at the end. Why not play around with some locomotion or some movement activities to develop that instead? So let's look at hamstrings. Hamstrings is probably one of the more focused upon movement and mobility patterns that we want to develop, especially if you want to get press to handstand, all of those other good stuff. So for the hamstrings, a few exercises I would recommend. The first, as I mentioned beforehand, is the ostrich walk. This exercise is essentially a ballistic stretch on the hamstrings. You can work within your own range of motion here. It's very easy to adjust, and you basically just try to cover a set range of distance while continually walking in a step-by-step fashion, stretching out the hamstrings. You might want to perform this from anywhere between 10 and 20 meters. Next would be a bear walk. This is going to essentially be working in an A-frame position, and something I know the guys over at Gold Medal Bodies are very fond of. This is going to both actively target your hamstring and calf flexibility, as well as your overhead mobility. Just like the ostrich walk, you might want to do this for a set distance, maybe 10 to 20 meters, and really work into those end ranges of motion. Next, let's talk about overhead mobility and the upper back. Often something that's a struggling point, especially for people who want to go on and do handstands, is very important. And this again can be built into your movement training. If we were to take an example from before, those bear walks are actually a really good example of how we can develop active overhead mobility as part of a movement pattern. You can also start learning the rotations into bridge, which Ido Portal is so fond of, starting on a wall and progressively working down to the floor. They are great at just opening up your shoulders and improving that overhead mobility. Finally, let's talk about the squat. This is such an essential position to be in, and something that people struggle a lot with. Actually, the squat is the foundation of a lot of these movement patterns. If we look even as simply as something like the roll, you're transitioning in and out of a squat. The same for something like a QDR push-up, even the au cortado, or just some basic kind of lateral locomotion moves. All of it involves being in a squat, moving a little bit, ending up in a squat. So if you're struggling with your squat and struggling to sit comfortably in it, incorporating some form of locomotion, which is this idea of moving in and out of a squat position, is actually a really, really good way to develop your squat. And the squat has so many benefits for just general hip mobility. It's going to affect hamstrings, glutes, ankles. Everything kind of is encapsulated into one kind of global stretch in that squat. So a really great one to include. But that's kind of it for this week, guys. This is kind of a basic overview of how you can start using movement training to improve your mobility. I will link in the description down below to a bunch of ideas and concepts that you can go dig through and give it a go, because that is the best way to learn. The best way to improve is to see something, try it and apply it to yourself. If you have any questions about today's video, guys, leave a comment in the comment section down below. If you're enjoying this series, hit that thumbs up button and support the channel. If you haven't already, why not hit that subscribe button, whichever corner it is at. And if YouTube isn't enough for you and you want to interact with more bodyweight warriors, more like-minded people, why not go over to the Facebook group and join the community over there. Over 3,000 people have joined, and it's really great to share experiences and ideas with other people. But that has been it for this week, guys. Have a strong week and peace.